AB 118 and SB 93. We're going to start with AB 118. And I understand that the Department of Finance will be presenting both bills. Is that accurate? All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Amy Costa with the Department of Finance. The committee has before it today a package of two bills designed to address the cleanup activities of the communities surrounding the Exide Technologies facility. These two bills consist of 5 specific components. The first bill is AB 118. AB 118 takes a general fund loan to the Toxic Substance Control account, and that will happen in the other bill, which I'll get to momentarily, and provides a $176.6 million appropriation to the Department of Toxic Substance Control to initiate cleanup of lead contamination in the areas surrounding the Exide Technologies facility. AB 118 also includes provisions that require the department to initiate public participation activities with the community prior to approval of a cleanup plan. The bill also includes the creation of a community job training program, which provides local residents of the impacted area with environmental skills, health and safety training, and job placement support. Lastly, AB 118 includes accountability measures that require the department to report on the number of access agreements signed, the number of properties sampled, and the number of properties cleaned up on their website and with the respective budget committees. The second measure, SB 93, is an amendment to the current year Budget Act. It would authorize a general fund loan to the Toxic Substance Control account of up to $176.6 million. This increased funding would be utilized by the department for the cleanup and testing of the contaminated properties of the Exide Technologies facility. This facility ceased operations in 2014 and permanently closed. The general fund loan shall be repaid by any cost recovered from the responsible party. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. I think we have a quorum, so let's establish it, please.
Leno.
Here.
Nielsen.
Here.
Allen. Here. Anderson. Bell. Block. Here. Glazer. Hancock. Mitchell. Monning. Here. Morlock. Here. Wynn. Pan. Here. Pabley. Roth. Here. Stone. Here. Wolk. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We do have our quorum. And just for clarification, we're going to be taking a vote on the assembly version. They're identical mirrored bills, AB 118. And there is a difference, excuse me, and we'll have that noted. And then SB 93 is just an informational, and that we have already passed it over to the assembly. So I know we have Director Lee here from the Department of Toxic Substance Control. And why don't we hear from you before we start with our questions? Welcome, Director Lee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As you noted, my name is Barbara Lee, and I'm the Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon about the appropriation of $176.6 million and the important enabling legislation for the cleanup of contaminated properties in the community surrounding the former Exide Technologies battery recycling facility in Vernon, California. This proposed cleanup is the largest of its kind ever undertaken in California. It demonstrates the administration's strong commitment to these communities, to revitalizing them and protecting the health of those who live there. The appropriation and enabling legislation are the result of strong collaboration between the administration and both houses of the legislature on meaningful actions to remove contamination and support a brighter economic future for these communities. The proposed appropriation will ensure that all residential properties, schools, daycare centers, and parks within a 1.7-mile radius around the facility are tested for lead contamination, and that contaminated soil is removed where lead levels are the highest and potential exposure is the greatest. I am prepared to answer questions from you regarding specifics of the program if you have them. I would like to simply close by pointing out for you that we have already made significant progress in responding to the problems facing the community. For example, as of April 5th, 2016, that is yesterday, DTSC has overseen the sampling of 726 residential properties. We have cleaned up or overseen the cleanup of 208 residential properties. We now have 1,112 signed access agreements that will allow us to sample additional properties, and another 500 properties have been sampled by the County of Los Angeles, and we appreciate their partnership in this effort. We also appreciate the partnership of the Mayor of Los Angeles and other local officials who have been reaching out to residents, securing access agreements, and encouraging their participation in free local blood lead testing. Our progress is posted at least weekly on our website, in addition to other reporting, and I look forward to updating you in the future on the progress that we make with this funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And it goes without saying, you and your department have, or you have inherited a department with a tragedy of epic proportions. And I want to thank you, as I'm sure the committee does as well, for your valiant efforts in trying to deal with the thousands of people who have been impacted by this more than unfortunate phenomenon, which is going to take many years to finally address. And I know that we have many questions to be asking you. I know that you have an entire game plan as to each step of the expenditure. Do you want to explain just briefly how you got to the 176.6?
Certainly. There are two primary components of the appropriation. One component deals with the testing of properties. So there is funding sufficient to conduct testing to characterize the contamination at all 10,000 properties that we estimate to be within this 1.7-mile radius around the facility. 1.7 miles was chosen based on extensive sampling that was done out to 4.5 miles from the facility, looking not only at the levels of lead found in the soil, but also at other companion marker metals, such as antimony, and looking for statistical patterns that would signify the impact of emissions from this lead battery recycling facility. And we estimate that the emissions could have affected properties up to 1.7 miles away. So we counted the properties within that radius, and have, based on our experience with testing so far, have a pretty good idea about how much it costs to test each property. And the funding will allow us to test all 10,000 properties within a year. The funding will also allow us to clean up properties that are the most impacted. It is sufficient to clean up to 2,500 properties. That is the number of properties we estimate would qualify as Priority 1 cleanup sites based on the criteria we have used. And that is based on the sampling that has already been done to date and the proportions that we see falling in that category. There are other components to the bill, including the job training component. We have heard very clearly from our interactions with the community that utilizing local labor and providing opportunities to increase job skills and employment in the local community is an important piece of the restorative justice element of our work there. A job training program associated with cleanup programs has been successfully undertaken by the US EPA as part of their National Superfund program, and we are modeling our efforts on theirs. And then lastly, there is a robust community engagement component to this appropriation to allow us to do the in-community work necessary to make sure all of the residents are aware of the work that is being done, understand the basis for the work being done, and have the opportunity to provide input into the decisions the department will be making.
Thank you. And I would imagine you'll have some self-monitoring ongoing so that we don't get a year or two out and you have to come back and ask for more money because someone wasn't watching the ball. How do you monitor the expenditures of the fund so that they are used as intended and so that we get everything we expect out of the 176.6?
The department is establishing an incident command structure for the implementation of this project. So for anyone who has worked in emergency response or other large focused projects, there is a very clearly defined set of communication pathways, decision-making processes, and we are using that well-established model to implement the decisions that need to be made and to track the decisions that are made. As part of that, there is representation from our budget office, so we will have current tracking of the expenditures that are being made, and we will be using that with the milestones from the program side of the department to make sure that the program milestones are matching the budget milestones, and we'll make mid-course corrections if we need to.
If I may, Mr. Chair, also
Yes,
there's a
Ms. Costa.
provision in 118 that would require the department, as part of their normal budgetary process with the respective budget committees, to come before and to report on the cleanup activities as well as the number of properties tested, remediated, and cleaned up.
Thank you. So, of course, the Senate bill is a loan from the general fund to the Toxic Substance Control Fund, special fund, and then the Assembly bill will then appropriate that same amount of money for the program that you're just outlining here. In this document, which I believe comes from the Department of Finance, which is the plan to expedite and expand testing and cleanup of properties contaminated by Exide, on page 2, it notes that DTSC ordered Exide to pay $9 million to fund the testing and cleanup of residential properties in the assessment areas. And then you amended that order requiring Exide to pay $5 million more by 2020 as an added down payment for cleanup. So that'd be a total of $14 million, which is certainly a fraction of the $176 million. I understand they're now in bankruptcy, but at the same time, they're also an international concern, and they're thriving and doing business in other parts of the globe. Of course, everyone on this committee is very concerned that we, of course, get this money back and repay the loan to the general fund. How is it that we had the ability to order them to pay us anything, and since we apparently have that ability, why it was $14 million and not closer to $176 million?
Excellent questions. A couple of points of clarification. Exide emerged from bankruptcy under Chapter 11 last April. So they are no longer in bankruptcy. The company has been restructured, and they are operating other concerns, not only internationally, but in other parts of this country as well. But the facility in Vernon, California is in closure, so that is not being operated any longer. The initial order to pay the $9 million for the testing and cleanup in what are referred to as the 2 initial assessment areas was brought forward in 2014, November of 2014, the order was issued, and that order was based on air modeling that was done for the South Coast Air Quality Management District, predicting where arsenic emissions would potentially create increased health risks to the community. It was believed at the time that that was a good predictor of where the lead emissions would also have gone, and estimates were made of how many properties might have been impacted by those emissions. The initial assessment areas reflect those early estimates, and Exide was also required under that same order to conduct additional testing stepping out from those initial areas to determine what, if any, impacts extended beyond those areas. That order was agreed to and approved by the bankruptcy court. So absent the bankruptcy court's approval, the department would not have had the ability to bring forward that 2014 order nor would we have had the ability to amend that order in March of 2015 when we informed Exide they would not be receiving a permit from us, and they went into closure, and we restructured the closure payments and also required an additional down payment of funds towards future cleanup activities. All of this happens against a backdrop of Exide having continuing responsibility under the state Superfund law for the cleanup of contamination the company has created in the community around the site. That responsibility has to be documented by us, and we are working with a number of partners, including the State Attorney General's office, securing the information needed to establish the documentation and recover the costs. And that is the way cost recovery work is normally done under the State Superfund program.
Do we get the sense that they recognize their responsibility for this and that we have good reason to believe we're going to be repaid for our expenses in cleaning up their mess?
Another good question with two separate answers. Exide has the position that they have already cleaned up the full extent of their contamination in the two initial assessment areas. They argue that they are not responsible for further contamination outside those two initial assessment areas. It is then incumbent upon the department to collect the data that demonstrate that they do in fact have responsibility for contamination outside those two initial assessment areas. The data we have so far collected preliminarily indicate that Exide's impacts may extend out to a distance between 1.3 and 1.7 miles from the facility, depending on the direction. Additional data is needed to conclusively make that case. We believe that we will have those data, and we will be able to make that case. We are also looking for—
When you say make that case, that's in a court of law, probably?
It might eventually go to a court of law. It might be resolved prior to going to a court of law. We will need to present the data that we have, and they will need to present the data that they have, and we'll see where we are at that point. I should point out, though, that we are also collecting the data necessary to identify any other potentially responsible parties, so that there may be others who have created contamination in these communities. It's a heavily industrialized area. There has been quite a lot of heavy industry in the area for many decades, and we are looking at the records of who has operated in that area, and we're looking at whether they may be responsible for any of the contamination that we find. Under the Superfund laws, parties are jointly and severally liable for the contamination. So if we show that Exide is responsible for some portion of the contamination, they are responsible for the cleanup of the site. And the site in this case would be the contaminated properties. But if we find that others are also responsible, then they could together between themselves or through the court have the costs of the cleanup apportioned based on their relative contribution.
So we focus so far really on the physical damage that Exide and potentially others have caused. What about the human damage? How do we determine the extent of it? Where are lines of responsibility for healthcare costs, for other— long-term. Yes, short and long-term. And all the other impacts to all of the folks who have lived in this 1.7-mile radius and the costs they will be incurring?
That's a difficult question to answer. It's difficult for a number of reasons. The communities around the Exide facility are heavily impacted not only by the operation of that facility, but by the operation of many other industrial sites. One of the state's largest rail yards is located in that very same area, as well as other heavy industrial activities. There are a number of freeways in the area, and there is a legacy of old housing with a lot of lead-based paint. So this is a community that is burdened with multiple sources of environmental impacts. That's borne out by the analyses that have been done using the CalEnviroscreen model that was developed by Cal EPA to look at multiple impacts on communities and the cumulative effects that they have. The department is looking at a number of ways to assess the impacts in those communities and to address them. We've been working with the California Department of Public Health to understand what the impacts on children's blood lead levels is in the area around the Exide facility. As I said last week in committee, in the Assembly, Budget Subcommittee 3, we received last week a report from CDPH summarizing their analysis of blood lead levels from 2012 in that area. And we've only just begun looking at the analysis. It's a very comprehensive analysis. They looked at over 12,000 blood lead samples and did quite a lot of statistical work to see what they might be attributed to. In addition, we're working with the County Department of Public Health. As one of the orders the department issued for the Exide facility, we required them to fund specific free blood lead testing in the communities around Exide. It was a 6-month pilot program. It began in 2014. It is actually still ongoing. They have agreed at our request to continue funding that effort. It is implemented by LA County Department of Public Health. They offer the free blood lead testing and they aggregate the data. We're working with them to get a better understanding of what those data show in terms of impacts on that community. The job skills training program is a concrete step the department is taking to provide some economic relief and brighter futures for that community. It is certainly not sufficient to offset all of the cumulative damages within the community from not only the Exide site, but the other sources of pollution and other health stressors that they face. But it is an important step, and we think it's a good step.
My last question, do we know if there are other Vernon-like tragic situations in California that we've identified, and what are we doing to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself?
You're full of wonderful questions. That is the essence of what I am doing with the department now. Based on an examination of CalEnviroscreen, I think it is safe to say that there are a number of heavily impacted communities throughout California. And like the community around the Exide facility, these communities face multiple environmental impacts and other stressors that affect their health and their welfare. We are working with Cal EPA, with our sister boards, departments, and offices within Cal EPA, and also reaching out to not only other departments within the state structure, but working with our federal partner, US EPA, as well as our local partners. We're building some strong partnerships with the local air districts to look at cumulative impacts. We're looking at water impacts. We're trying to evaluate where there are gaps between regulatory authorities and programs that are implemented by each of these entities, but that fail to see or appropriately respond to some of the impacts that together have created the situation around Exide. So a concrete example of that is, generally speaking, air emissions from a facility's stack or chimney are regulated by the local air district or perhaps by the California Air Resources Board in some cases. But the emissions that come out of that facility may, if there are heavy metal emissions like lead, settle in the community around the facility. They then become the jurisdiction of the department once they have been deposited on the ground. We don't have the ability to prevent their emission from the stack. The air agencies are charged with making sure the emissions while they are in the air don't present a public health threat. But there may be a gap in what happens to those emissions as they accumulate over decades upon decades of time. And we have begun discussions with our partner agencies on identifying those kinds of situations to see, are there ways to work collaboratively to narrow those gaps, and are there places where our authorities just can't bridge the gap? And the legislature needs to be made aware of that so that you can decide what the appropriate policy is going forward.
Thank you, Director Lee, for your forthright answers. Senator Nielsen has some questions, and Senator Monning, and then we have a list growing. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Senator Nielsen.
To whomever, what agency will be responsible for the job training? Would this be EDD, or who will be under this section of the bill for the job training? Who will be responsible?
The bill would authorize the Department of Toxic Substances Control to develop the program, working in partnership, for example, with US EPA, but also with other state or local entities that have expertise in this area. We've already had a number of meetings with different entities, including some community college organizations and other nonprofits who do this kind of work, looking at models to develop an effective program. We aren't trying to reinvent the wheel. As I said, US EPA has used this model successfully at Superfund cleanup sites across the nation, and so we are taking from their model and we are adapting it with the help of other state and local and nonprofit entities so that we have an effective job skills program.
Are these jobs to be viewed as adjuncts to the cleanup or critical to the cleanup, or both?
We are looking at providing community members with skills to participate in a variety of activities directly associated with the cleanup. On the easiest end, we have a lot of people going door to door, securing access agreements, informing residents in the communities about potential dangers from lead exposure and how to prevent them, and answering questions about the cleanup and helping them to become involved. So we are already partnering with some local nonprofits in doing that work, and we hope to expand that. There are also opportunities for residents to be trained to participate in the crews that are doing the sampling of the soil. We've had 2 training events and look to be holding more training events. Community members come. They are trained in the technical skills needed. It is not highly technical work. There's a certain amount of technical background that's needed, and then they are eligible to be hired as part of the sampling crews that will be testing 10,000 properties. There is also cleanup work. The cleanup work that is done is similar to standard construction work, except that there are special health and safety components because the soil involved has lead contamination in it. So we would be providing that added health and safety training, training that's called HAZWOPER training that is required to work on sites such as these. Community members who have experience in construction type work would be eligible to participate in that training and then join the cleanup crews. There's also interior cleaning of the residences after the external property remediation has been done to make sure that any contaminated dust that was left behind is removed from the property. Community members can be trained in the specific HUD protocols that are involved in doing that cleaning and be certified to do that enhanced cleaning of the interior properties. So there are a number of ways we're thinking that community members can acquire job skills, become employed as part of this project, and perhaps increase their employment opportunities post-project as well.
Well, you kind of made a point. credentialing and certifications. Now, I'm sure not all of these positions, but in private sector as well as public, people who do these things in environmental agencies, public and private, they do have to have certifications and qualifications and pass tests. Will this be part of the requirement for some of the local individuals who will be doing some of this work? They'll have to get these credentials and certifications?
Depending on the nature of the work, yes. So for example, the HAZWOPER certification is a 40-hour training course, and there is a test involved. So we would be offering HAZWOPER training and certification to community members who want to take the class, and if they pass the test, they would get the certification.
Understood. Now, this is to be only a short-time employment for these local workers. What kind of expectations are they being given as to terms of long-term opportunities for them? I mean, they're developing an employable skill, I'll give that. And you would hope that that's transferable to something else, but in that area where they live, that may not be a job that's going to be around a long time. At least you would hope not, because your job gets done, I assume.
We certainly do hope that and expect that there is an end to this cleanup. However, what we're looking at right now is the portion of the cleanup that the state is leading for these Priority 1 properties. There are up to 10,000 potentially contaminated properties within this area. At some point, we do transition to a responsible party-led cleanup or some further cost recovery cleanup. So there will potentially be longer-term cleanup ongoing in the area after the 2-year cleanup that we are envisioning with this $176.6 million is completed. Even if the residents are not further employed in this specific cleanup site, however, it is valuable job experience that they will then have on their resumes, and it would make them employable in other job sites in the Los Angeles region, and sadly, there is no shortage of contaminated sites that will be cleaned up in the Los Angeles region.
Well, it certainly would be a higher level of skill, and therefore I would assume more transferable, but they might have to move to find those jobs, I expect, somewhere out there. And what about the liability considerations? Is that still a big prospect down there? Because there's a lot of private properties, too, that we're going to be dealing with as things are being cleaned up. Has that been contemplated? As far as the state, this pool of money is for cleaning up. But are we expecting a lot of lawsuits and litigation, for example? I mean, talking about CEQA, for example, I assume that this is going to be exempted or not exempted from CEQA, the cleanup?
There is no CEQA exemption that's part of the package moving forward right now. The administration is committed to moving forward with a safe, effective cleanup as quickly as possible. If there is some future streamlining of the CEQA process to allow this to move forward more quickly, we're open to those discussions, but we are fully prepared to complete a comprehensive environmental impact review of the project. We are in the process of engaging the consultant to do that work. We're negotiating the scope of work right now and expect to be undertaking that environmental impact analysis in the coming months.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. We have Senator Monning, followed by Senators Pavley, Morlock, Roth, Stone, Allen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentations. I also just want to echo the Chair's concerns and questions about Excide's long-range liability. It sounds that they're in for $14 million, and we're looking at committing at least $176 million. So I do see as part of the language pursuing available remedies against potentially responsible parties, and you outlined some of that. My question goes to the public health issue. You mentioned coordination with the California Department of Public Health, blood level monitoring. It seems best scenario is a year for screening and remediation of property. Are there any families, any children who are facing current today risk of exposure for each day that this hasn't been cleaned up? And if so, is there any plan for relocating families who are in particularly at-risk locations?
Thank you for the question, Senator. At this point in time, the department is aware of only 2 children in the communities around the Exide facility that have elevated blood lead levels currently. The specific identity of children who are tested in the state's blood lead testing program, broadly speaking, that's confidential information. So we are not able to see that information even as part of the CDPH analysis that was done. However, if families notify us that their child has elevated blood lead levels, we put them at the top of the list. We respond immediately. We sample the property and we begin the cleanup. And so in the 2 instances where families have come forward and notified us that they have children with elevated blood lead levels on site, we have already gone out, sampled, and completed that cleanup.
Well, thank you, but to me, that sounds like a reactive protocol. It puts the burden on the family to first determine that there's a raised blood level. And my understanding, Dr. Pan would know better, there's no cure for lead contamination. Is there a proactive effort to offer families the ability to distance themselves from, they could be getting exposed today. They might not get a blood level test for 6 months or 9 months or a year, and then you're working backwards with no remedy for that child who's faced exposure. I would think there should be a more proactive program to allow families to protect themselves and their children. Is there any program that would allow for a family to remove themselves from these contaminated areas?
In terms of proactive efforts, as I mentioned earlier, we have required Exide to fund free blood lead testing in the communities around the facility, and so that testing has been available since 2014 and continues to be available. As far as relocation goes, we are providing relocation during the remediation at each property, so families are able to relocate during the 3 to 5 days while the cleanup is underway. We have worked with some public health experts at CDPH and in the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. What they have told us is that based on the levels of lead in the soil that have been seen through the testing so far, there is not an immediate risk to these children. However, we are, as I said, urging folks to have their blood lead levels tested, and if a child has elevated blood lead levels, we are offering relocation during the cleanup of the property, and we do the cleanup right away.
And is that information about the possibility of relocation part of the public outreach? Are families being informed of it?
Yes, it is.
And how are they being informed of that?
We've had a number of public meetings. We have the information available on our website. We have done mail-outs to the properties within this 1.7-mile radius. We've been going door to door. Our employees have been going door to door. We've also been partnering with nonprofits, with the City of Los Angeles, the County of Los Angeles. There have been public health nurses out walking in the community. So in addition to making sure they're aware of the free blood lead testing, we are also providing them with information about sources of lead, not just in the soil, but many of these homes are very old homes and have elevated levels of lead in the paint. There are other potential sources as well, so we're giving them information about what those sources are and how to reduce their potential exposure to those sources.
And what's roughly the population in the 1.7-mile radius?
We have estimated approximately 10,000 residential properties within that radius. I don't have a population count on that, but that should give you a rough idea of what we're looking at.
That's properties, residential properties.
Residential properties, yes.
So if it were an average of 4 people per property, 40,000 to 50, 60,000 individuals.
And potentially higher. Some of these properties are multifamily dwellings, and so there would be apartment buildings or at least a couple of residences on the property. So I think that would be a low estimate.
What language is the outreach being done in?
It's currently being done in English and Spanish, but we also have the capacity to provide the materials in other languages as well. But the residential communities around the facility are overwhelmingly Spanish-speaking.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I know there's others. I'll stop there, but thank you for
Thank you,
me with that.
Senator Mounting. Senator Pavley.
And Senator Roth reminded me it was a budget hearing, not a policy hearing, and I appreciate that, so I'll try to keep my questions shorter. Regarding the acceleration of the cleanup, I know blood testing is going on, and there's been articles in lots of the papers that if we have blood testing, shouldn't those homes be the first ones in their backyards? There's pictures of kids playing in their backyards in the soils, and we know that's the direct contact for long-term potential health consequences. So are you using the blood testing to sort of prioritize where those cleanups will be with the $178,000?